My name is Gene Karpinski. I'm the president of League of Conservation Voters Victory Fund, and welcome to this press event. Thanks for taking the extra day to have this event. I'll be joined by 7 of my colleagues who will make brief remarks after I do, and then we'll have plenty of time for conversation and questions. Let me first say, I think most folks saw we put out a joint statement yesterday, and I want to repeat that again today, which is most importantly, record number of people have voted. It's important that all those votes be counted. We've watched local elected officials do a great job in state after state after state counting those votes. Those votes must be counted. We must respect the voters who cast those votes. And we're frankly, at the end, when all those votes are counted, that with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the winners, and we'll have new leadership in the White House. And that's a major change in our democracy. So still time to count all those, make sure they all get counted, but we're extremely confident. So here's what we know about this election so far. As I said, a record break, despite the pandemic, a record-breaking turnout. And most importantly, know that Joe Biden was the candidate with the most ambitious climate action and environmental justice plan we've ever seen. And he got the most votes of any candidate in the history of our country. Most ambitious plan, most votes ever. And clearly what we know is the coalition of voters who voted for Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris have made clear again and again and again, they want climate action and they want it now. We heard Joe Biden on the stump many, many times talk about 4 crises: the COVID crisis, the economic crisis, the racial justice crisis, and yes, the climate crisis, and how all these crises are connected, and the solutions that we need will help solve each of those 4 serious crises that are facing this country. So we're all in to make sure that happens. Folks probably saw memos from us. We put some out all across the year, and a big one on Friday. LCV Victory Fund is proud to say, with all our affiliated entities, we invested by far the most money we've ever invested in politics, which is over $115 million, and still going because we anticipate spending money in Georgia over the next couple months. So biggest investment ever, and we're proud of that with a lot of great stories to tell. We had a lot of great partnerships with almost every group on this phone call, but a lot of other groups in the larger community. We made a particular strategy to invest in Black-led groups in this critical moment. So groups like Black PAC, Black Voters Matter PAC, Somos PAC, as well as, again, groups on this call, Priorities USA, and many, many others. We're proud of those partnerships with all the groups on this phone call and many, many others. And look, let's be honest, it was we had these most of our focus was different. We had one of the best door-to-door campaigns in the country for the last 2 or 3 cycles. We didn't go door-to-door, but we made our folks and our volunteers and our staff made phone calls. They did texts. We used digital. We did all kinds of paid communications, mail, phone, etc., to make sure we contacted swing voters who care about the environment to make sure they voted for the right candidates, and then make sure we turned voters out at the key times. And a record-breaking turnout despite the obstacles, and all of us contributed to help make that happen. We also had a great Green Roots program for I think it's the 4th cycle in a row. Many of our partners are part of that, where we bring our volunteers together from our groups to actually coordinate with the campaigns. Again, they didn't go knock on doors this time, but they made texts, they made phone calls, they made sure the vote got out to make sure we win this election. So what comes next? Again, for all of us, politics is a strategy. It's an important strategy that we all engage in because it's so important, but it's a strategy to win policy. So as we are very confident we've won the White House, we've had a lot of state victories in our country. We'll get to some of those in a second, but we need to make sure those policies, the political victories turn into climate and democracy and climate justice and racial justice policies. We saw back in 2018, after historic elections across the country, that's what happened in state after state after state. We made progress on climate policies, racial justice policies, and democracy policies, and many others. That's what has to happen after we win the politics of 2020 to make progress of the policies as we go forward. So speaking of the states, we invested in a lot of states. Our biggest investment in our state LCV partners across the country. I'm proud to welcome Laura Dent, who runs Chispa, Arizona, and its associated PAC in the great state of Arizona. All eyes are on Arizona. In the last cycle, together with Laura, we made our biggest investment of any state in Arizona, over $8 million. To help elect the new senator and to help win a lot of state and local races. This cycle, we actually, again, made our biggest investment in Arizona, over nearly $9 million. Again, in a lot of local races, Laura will talk about, as well as in the presidential race and the state senate race. So take it away, Laura. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Gene. Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Obviously, all eyes on Arizona, which is exciting. We're so proud of the work that has been done on the ground, not just this cycle, but for the many years before, building grassroots community organizing base. Our program, Chispa Arizona, is focused on engaging the Latino community in building political power to move the needle on climate and environment. We know that Latinos, young people, people of color care more about the environment and want to see more done. And they are underrepresented in the political process. And that's something that we try to rectify through inclusive campaigns and conversations, but also through leadership development, organizing, civic engagement, and power building in the state. So really the victory that we have seen, obviously there are still about 500,000 ballots to count in the state, about 300,000 plus coming from Maricopa County, which we saw significant gains in on Tuesday, but the AP has called Biden and Kelly in the state, which we're just so thrilled and proud of. And that really is the byproduct of a decade plus of grassroots organizing in our state and community building and power building. If you all remember the legacy of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, we really went from the epicenter of hate to a battleground state, and we couldn't be more proud of the developments that we've made there, particularly for us when we're speaking to issues of climate and environment. We know that our community cares a lot about those issues. And so we focused on also in a remote COVID environment, having conversations with voters on the phones, via text. We made more than 1.3 million calls to voters. We had 45,000 conversations with folks. We placed newspaper ads, digital ads, mail pieces, to focus on a handful of races that really have an outsized impact on our health and our environment, right? The bills that we pay, the air we breathe, and the water we drink in the state. So have been doing work on our Public Utility Commission race, as well as our efforts to flip the legislature. At this point, it looks like the Senate is moving in our favor, but again, there's quite a few ballots left to count across the state, and we want to make sure that we take the time to count every vote in Arizona and across the country. So we couldn't be more thrilled to work in partnership with national leaders on this call, but also first and foremost with the grassroots community partners in the state that have been building the power that new American majorities, Latinos, people of color, and young people really help make this victory possible. So I hope that we can all take the lesson away of what was done in Arizona and what will continue to be done, and the way that we need to have these conversations about the environment.
That's great, Laura. Thanks. Take it away, Gina.
Well, first of all, thank you, Gene, for pulling this together. Thanks, everybody, and hi, all my colleagues. Listen, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are on their way to a tremendous victory, and a hard-fought one. And we have made it possible. And they have delivered because they understood that this had to be a people-powered movement. And having those two in the White House will benefit people all across the country in so many ways. It'll benefit their health, our economy, racial justice, as well as our children's future. Look, Joe Biden ran on climate. How great is this? You know, and he had a vision for a clean energy future for all of us. And one of the things I'm most excited about, and I know I'm not alone on this call, is Joe Biden's climate plan is the strongest we've ever seen from any president in our nation's history. And he listened and he learned and he vows to put that into action starting on day one. So once this race is finally over, it'll be time to start turning those promises into real progress. It'll be time for the White House to finally get back to leading the charge against the central environmental crisis of our time. And it's essential for every single one of us in this country, because fighting climate change isn't just about protecting polar bears and faraway places. It is essentially about protecting people, our families, right here and right now. It's about preventing asthma attacks and cancer and premature deaths. It's about keeping our families safe from extreme weather like heat waves and hurricanes and those horrendous wildfires that we are seeing. It's about standing up for low-income communities and communities of color that are not only hit first and worst, by the impacts of climate change, but who for too long have lived within the shadows of polluting fossil fuel industries and are now dying at higher rates from COVID-19 as a result. It's about creating good American jobs by moving us towards smarter ways to power our future, investing in clean energy industries that hold tremendous economic opportunities. We're talking about millions of jobs, and we're talking about supporting our labor community because that is one of the great values that Joe Biden has always held dear. And it's about giving our children the kind of future they deserve to grow up in, one that's healthier, more just, and certainly much more hopeful than we have ever seen before. NRDC Action Fund is so proud of the part of the movement we played that not only got us to where we are today, but that made climate change a central issue in the 2020 election. 2020 was the NRDC Action Fund's largest ever electoral program for the first year of our super PAC called NRDC Action Votes. Our targeted text out the vote program reached over 3 million voters in 6 states: Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, and Ohio. That work mattered. And we endorsed our largest slate of federal candidates ever. And we're really proud that the NRDC Action Fund PAC helped the Give Green program raise an astonishing $43 million for pro-environment candidates. NRDC Action Votes, the super PAC we started, invested more than $3 million in independent expenditure ads, often teaming up with some of our partners that are sitting on this call today. And together, that work paid off. Let me just give you one example. His name is Hickenlooper in Colorado. We spent money on on John Hickenlooper's campaign, and we focused on telling people about his commitment to clean cars and electrifying Colorado's transportation sector. And I could not be happier to see John headed to the Senate, where he is going to remain committed on leading on climate issues. But make no mistake, this election's just the beginning. Climate change isn't going away anytime soon, and our fight to keep this vital political issue isn't going away either. That's how progress works. It starts with people standing up, demanding it, and being counted, and that's what we see happening today. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Gina. Tom, take it away.
Good morning. And let me say, it is such an honor to be on this call with so many of the leaders of the climate movement, so many of my heroes. As Jean said, this was a turnout election. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris got the most votes of any ticket in history. And in particular, more young people voted in this election than have ever voted before. And they overwhelmingly voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That didn't just happen. NextGen's been organizing young people for 8 years. We've built a team in infrastructure, and together with our partners, including many on this call, we've seen great strides in youth turnout over that time. In 2018, there was a dramatic move up in youth turnout, and in particular, there's a dramatic move up, especially where NextGen organizes. We've never stopped organizing, and we've carried those gains from 2018 into 2020. We went totally digital on March 10th. The 5 key states that we're all talking about these days, we've been in for 8 years. But the big point is this: Joe Biden went from a minus 22% approval rating with young voters in May to a plus 23% approval rating with young voters in October. We started educating young voters on the Biden climate agenda on June 1st. And that plan and the Biden-Harris commitment to and emphasis on climate were critical to a change in approval. In crucial states like Arizona that we've been talking about, the youth vote will end up being the margin of victory. We had 27 staff dedicated to Arizona, thousands of volunteers, registered 10,000, got 30,000 commitments to vote specifically, and we reached hundreds of thousands of people through text, phone calls, mail, and digital ads. Young people supported Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in every single demographic, including specifically young white voters. Young voters have become a grassroots foundation for the entire Democratic Party. They will remain that going forward because it builds every time. And getting that kind of turnout from young people is a critical part to getting the climate policies, the climate change in attitude that everybody on this call is dedicated to, and it's only going to build from here. Thanks, Gene.
That's great, Tom. And in new addition to these events, but a powerhouse in working with young people as well. Varsh, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Gene. Hello, my name is Varshini Prakash, and I'm the Executive Director for Sunrise Movement. I'm calling in from out of Boston today. And, you know, Tom covered a lot of it, but young people showed up to the polls in historic numbers, particularly motivated by climate. We saw almost 50% turnout in all 11 battleground states by young people. And, you know, Tom already talked about the margins, so I don't need to go into that too much, but the margins get even larger if you specifically consider youth of color. Black youth voting for Biden, 86 to 10%. Asian youth, 83 to 14. Latinx youth, 74 to 23. White youth, 51 to 45. And in many ways, the energy that young people have brought throughout this election cycle, that will have catapulted Joe Biden into the presidency if we get that result today. And, you know, Sunrise Movement and our tens of thousands of members and our partners and allies, we've had a significant impact on this election in numerous ways. We set an extremely high bar for America's climate agenda and held candidates to it throughout the entirety of the 2020 cycle at the presidential level and at the down ballot. From day one, Sunrise played a leading role in enforcing a race to the top on climate amongst the presidential candidates on the Democratic side. We used creative actions, bird dogging strategies, strong storytelling, and digital and media strategies to make sure that every single major Democratic presidential candidate swore off of oil and gas money. In 2016, that was only Bernie Sanders. And every candidate released climate plans. And because we had helped make the Green New Deal and climate essentially a litmus test for the 2020 election, you know, Joe Biden released his climate plan as the first policy as a candidate following his entry into the primary. Throughout the spring and summer, Sunrisers campaigned heavily alongside many of the partners who are here to score some wins in high-profile races in the primaries. Jamal Bowman's race, where he made the Green New Deal a centerpiece of his campaign, young people made 850,000 of the 1.3 million phone calls. We helped bring Ed Markey to a victory in Massachusetts and helped play defense for other members of the squad. I think Ed Markey is formally in the squad now, who won resoundingly despite the intense attacks that have been put both on the Green New Deal and on them personally over the last 2 years. And I think we were able to prove that youth movements and progressives will not only call out those who are failing our generation by not stepping up to the plate, but we will also show up and show out for candidates and do everything in our power to help them win when they champion our agenda. And so earlier this year, when it became apparent that Joe Biden would become the Democratic nominee, Sunrise, alongside our youth allies in immigrant justice, racial justice, gun violence prevention movements, were sounding the alarm to the Biden campaign about Biden's abysmal ratings amongst young people and that this might cost him the election. And to the campaign's credit, they really welcomed us in. I participated in the Sanders-Biden Unity Task Force, which was a great joy, and I learned a lot to do so alongside Gina McCarthy, who's on this call, who I can personally say is a total boss. And they ended up producing a far better climate plan, incorporated it into his Build Back Better policy agenda. He campaigned on it, he ran ads on it, he made speeches specifically about climate. And as Tom mentioned, as a result, his numbers amongst young people increased by 40 points from just a couple months ago. So, you know, in addition to that, we helped contact millions of voters in swing states, particularly North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, getting thousands and thousands of young people to sign up to make calls as part of our Victory Squad, and thousands participating in our vote tripling program on Election Day. And it's been an incredibly exciting moment to realize that 2 years ago in 2018, after the election, we were seeing articles saying that Dems are damping down hopes on climate. And then we're here in 2020 and seeing the possible next president of the United States of America utilizing climate justice and environmental justice as his closing argument. So it's incredibly exciting. And we're seeing that Joe Biden has a climate mandate. And we expect him to do everything in his power to act on climate change over the next weeks and months.
That's great. Thanks. I know folks are throwing questions in the chat. Keep doing that. We're going to get to as many as we can. We turn it up next to Joe. Thanks, Varsh.
Everybody, and thank you, Gene. I'm always impressed by what my green colleagues are managed to pull off election after election. But maybe because COVID has kept us apart, I'm really blown away this year by the scale and innovation you all have shown. Your impact and efforts were incredible. And as always, thank you for the partnership. With so many close races and still so many races to be called, serves as another reminder of why we're in this fight and why we don't stop doing this critical work and hope someone else will just pick up the slack. It is incredibly important that every voice be heard and every vote be counted. And even though we're doing the wrap up today, we continue to work to make sure this happens. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I'm not surprised. My name is Joe Bonfiglio, and I am president of EDF Action, Environmental Defense Fund's advocacy partner. Through EDF Action and EDF Action votes, we invested nearly $19 million a cycle, doubling our spending from 2018. That is a lot of money, but we knew there would be bigger players out there. So that's why we tried to laser focus on just a few races in the toughest to win places and use research throughout the cycle to guide our decision making. The shorthand here at EDF Action was that we were going to try to play Moneyball this year. And yes, I'm going to overuse this analogy for the next minute. The bunts, singles, and the occasional double would all add up to win each election. We picked races that we thought would have the most leverage, elections where we could impact the legislative chamber or help elevate a key voice in government. So for starters, beating an incumbent president is tough. It doesn't happen often or very easily. We invested over $3 million in the fight, and just in one media market and just in one state, in Tampa, Florida, making Trump campaign and compete for climate votes in this key area. We knew that Florida and our focused media market strategy was just one piece of a very complicated and very expensive political equation. But when you pick races in the toughest places, you're playing to make a big difference, not pad a batting average. Now, we ran the same strategy in 4 races for the United States Senate, 10 key House battlegrounds, more than 30 down ballot races in 5 key states. There was no part of the ballot that was off limits. We helped win 2 critical Senate races, helped reelect environmental champions like Gary Peters to the Senate, helped reelect environmental champs in tight races like Abigail Spanberger, who won yesterday by about 5,000 votes, Sydney Axney and Lizzie Fletcher too. And we played to win in Arizona and North Carolina state legislatures, both places where party control is up for grabs. As Gene mentioned, we focused on political messages that would move the most votes, and by and large, those were environmental issues. They were still front and center even during COVID, and they were front and center races at every level of the ballot. This included climate ads in Florida and Pennsylvania, public lands in Montana, pollution and public health in Arizona. Now, from our independent campaigns to our work with many of our brethren groups here in the Green Wave. Now, Green Wave, for those of you that do not know, is where we utilize our memberships of each of these organizations to embed in candidate campaigns and drive the vote. This helped net 4 Senate wins, Colorado with John Hickenlooper, Michigan and Gary Peters, an incredibly close race, Mark Kelly, we believe, in Arizona, and of course, Ben Ray Lujan in New Mexico. We're incredibly proud of this effort, and I know the groups represented here are too. Now, while there are still races that remain uncalled and others that were really close, once we get into the numbers, we're confident that we knew we made an impact. And that, of course, is even if this is the first time you heard that we were playing ball. Gene, back to you.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. And over to Mike. Take it away, Mike.
All right, thanks, Gene, and hello, everybody. Before I get started, let me just say I hope that everybody on this call, whether reporters or staff, are healthy and doing okay, and that your loved ones are doing the same in this historic pandemic. I'm Mike Brune, Executive Director for the Sierra Club, and I want to start by offering our congratulations to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for winning more votes in a presidential race in U.S. history. Also want to offer a particular congratulations to Kamala Harris for being on the cusp of being the first female vice president in US history and first woman of color in a winning presidential ticket in US history. And I think it's appropriate to offer congratulations to all of us, all Americans, for voting in record numbers, despite this pandemic, despite the unnecessarily long lines in places all across the country, despite the fact that there was voter suppression and intimidation, we all turned out in record numbers. So in that case, one of the biggest foundations of our democracy is strong and thriving. People still believe in our ability to choose our own government. At the Sierra Club, we made defeating Donald Trump our top organizational priority in 2020. And it looks like we will all collectively be able to say that we achieved that goal. Sierra Club built a force of 33,000 members and supporters and volunteers to run this campaign for us. Collectively, we wrote about 1.3 million personalized handwritten letters. Our members and supporters made more than 5.5 million phone calls on the presidential race, and we sent more than 20 million text messages to voters. We also had several dozen of our lawyers on the ground. We had about 500 of our members and supporters engaged as poll workers or poll watchers. And overall, up and down the tickets, the Sierra Club endorsed more than 1,000 candidates up and down the ticket, as I said. We're confident that in the end that Joe Biden will be elected as the president of the United States. We believe that he will end up with a clear victory in the Electoral College. We believe that he will secure a resounding victory in the total vote, in the popular vote, possibly doubling, at least doubling what Trump lost by in the last election. And as has been said by, I think, every person on this call, he has made climate a central element to his campaign. And so we expect that President Biden, Vice President Harris will have a decisive mandate to act with great strength and great clarity on climate change and protecting our air and our water and our communities when this administration takes office. We'll be able to replace someone who was a climate denier with someone who will rejoin Paris and move our country to 100% clean energy. We'll be able to replace someone who undermined and rewrote more than 125 safeguards with someone who will protect Bears Ears, protect the Arctic, strengthen our protections for air and water and climate and species in our forests and our parks. And we'll replace someone who was the white supremacist in chief with someone with an administration committed to justice and a movement that will hold that administration accountable. So we are on the cusp of being overjoyed about the results of this presidential race and fully expectant that we will see transformative change in the weeks and months ahead. And until then, we will say once again what we have said from the beginning, that we have to count every vote because every one of us counts. We can't protect our environment if we do not safeguard our democracy and the rights of citizens to choose their own government. And before I end, I just want to address what the current president is up to. Donald Trump has been telling us loud and clear in public for nearly a year that he will do everything possible to delegitimize the election results. And he has worked alongside the Republican Party to disenfranchise as many voters, especially Black and brown voters, as possible in order to cling to power. So it is no surprise that Trump is doubling down on exactly that strategy right now. But in spite of the pandemic, in spite of the economic disaster that we're in spite of voter intimidation and voter suppression, voters believe deeply in our democracy and are committed to making this country a better place. Our work at the Sierra Club, and I believe across this movement, has really only just begun. We will continue to organize, we will continue to mobilize, and we'll work together to restore our right to clean air and clean water and a sustainable, healthy climate, because we don't have any other choice. This will begin with repairing the damage that's been done over the last 4 years and immediately pivoting to a bold, urgent, and inspiring agenda that will address the climate crisis, that will address deep systemic racism and the economic inequality that plagues our nation. Back to you, Gene.
Thanks, Mike. And last but certainly not least, Wendy from Environment America. Go for it.
Great. Thanks, Gene. So great to be with everybody this morning. President Elect Biden's expected, we hope, victory reflects American support for clean air, clean water, and open spaces. But we're also very thrilled to have John Hickenlooper heading into the US Senate from our headquarters in Colorado, and to be returning Senator Ed Markey, the Senate's #1 climate champion, to the Senate. But now we must turn to the important work of building grassroots support for environmental policies. As the old saying goes, if the people lead, the leaders will follow. And in this case, we need to continue to reach out, educate, and organize all Americans around sensible, bipartisan environmental solutions, whether that's solar and wind tax credits, land conservation, perhaps even ending fossil fuel subsidies, which are both bad for the environment, of course, but also bad for the budget. We need to keep growing and deepening the public support for protecting public health and the planet so that we can more consistently elect environmental champions at all levels of government. And finally, much of our work, at least, happens at the state level in state legislative bodies out of our 29 state offices. In fact, yesterday, the state of New Jersey passed the toughest in the nation ban on single-use plastics. So a lot of the action isn't happening in Washington, it's happening in the states. So we're committed to working with the states, with state elected officials and champions from states who are pushing forward on things like 100% renewable energy. While the president is pulling us out of Paris, the states have been forging ahead. 8 states have already committed to 100% clean energy policies, and many more to come. So that will be our emphasis in the coming months, as well as working with, we hope, a newly elected President Biden.
That's great. Thanks, Wendy. And so we have a lot of questions in the chat, which is great. I'm not going to promise we can get to all of them. Let me just remind on a couple things. One is that this president had the boldest and most ambitious plan ever. He got the most votes in history. That's a very positive sign. And let's be honest, we didn't win every race. And some of the questions get to that. We'll get to some of that. We didn't win every race we worked in. No doubt about it. Nor did we win in every state we worked in. Overall, it was a big win, but there are certainly some disappointments along the way, particularly some of our House champions and a couple of Senate races. So to be clear, I don't want to sugarcoat it. We didn't win every race we talked about, but we won the most important prize that we all said was our top priority. And in key states like Arizona, won up and down the ballot, which is great. I'm gonna call on people. So you unmute yourself. Rather than me try to read questions, I'm gonna call on people, get to as many as we can. And I'm gonna ask I'll try to call on a responder where appropriate, but try to only have one person respond. Maybe a second person if you want to make a second point. For us, let's be disciplined and try to get through as many questions as possible. I'm gonna give and identify your outlet when you ask your question, if you would, please. But I'm gonna call on Lisa Friedman first. Lisa, you there? Unmute.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you guys for doing this today. Well, I have a couple questions, but let's start with what specifically you think Biden will be able to get done in a probably Republican-controlled or split Senate. And I want to talk about, really his most specific near-term emissions reduction goal is eliminating fossil fuel emissions from the power sector by 2035. Talk about what is the path to that. Do you see him trying to restore a new clean power plan? Is some type of clean energy standard viable in Congress? Game out some of the possibilities if you could.
So I'm going to call on someone who has a lot of experience with the clean power plan. Gina, why don't you take a crack at that?
Thanks. And Lisa, thanks for your question. I think that I would answer all of the above. I think that Joe Biden will have lots of opportunity to think of different tools moving forward. One of the best things that we can acknowledge, I think, right now out of the gate is that we know that clean energy actually saves people money. We are not forcing a difficult situation on people. We're giving them real opportunities to put food on the table and to breathe cleaner air. So there's lots of opportunity for him to use executive authority to look for setting standards, to look for federal investments in technologies that advance battery storage, to get the grid constructed in an infrastructure investment. So there's ample opportunity for significant benefits moving forward. And you can do that without the consent and authority of the legislature. You can do it under the authorities that are given to the executive branch. And I expect he'll use and consider all of those.
Thanks, Gina. Let me call on Dino for the second question. You unmute, Dino?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question was similar to Lisa's. How much appetite do you think there is among Senate Republicans to get any sort of climate legislation done? And do you expect any economic stimulus bill that comes next winter to potentially contain anything green?
So let me take a first crack. And Mike Brune, why don't you jump in second on this? So first, let me just say, first of all, it's not yet clear who's going to control the Senate, as we know. There's at least one and possibly two runoff races in Georgia that I know will be engaged in. So TBD on that. But and obviously, look, if McConnell still runs the Senate, that's a huge challenge. Let's be honest about that. Having said that, we've seen progress be made now and then when an overwhelming rest of the body wants to get stuff done, like the Great American Outdoors Act that we saw historic public lands work this year. We've seen it with Republicans in charge, clean energy tax credits. As Gina was saying, we need a big infrastructure package. If you want to rebuild America, you need to be investing in the clean energy future. So I think there are appropriations processes happen every year. And I think, with budgets will be different. We're looking forward to a Biden budget, how you invest money in different places. So I think there still are a lot of opportunities, even if McConnell still controls the Senate. And as you know, there are some Republicans who understand this issue and have tried to make progress in the past. So it won't be as ambitious, no two ways about it, but we think there are opportunities to make progress. And we're going to have to, the House is going to continue to pass aggressive things like they did in this past 2 years and put the pressure on the Senate to let's get stuff done, especially when you have someone in the White House who also wants to get stuff done. Mike, you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. I guess I'll start with that last point. Remember that we will have someone in the White House that has made a career out of bringing people together, particularly across the aisle. So I wouldn't underestimate the ability of this new administration to identify legislation that will achieve multiple goals and will meet some of the needs of Republican senators in their own districts. We know that there will be plenty of pieces of legislation that will have to move in 2021, whether it's COVID relief or a broader economic stimulus or an infrastructure bill or other packages. There will be multiple opportunities to advance strong policies on climate change and clean energy through a variety of forms. And we have to remember that while all of these negotiations will take place throughout 2021 and the years beyond, we'll see more devastating wildfires. We'll see more devastating extreme weather events. We will still be gripped in the throes of a significant economic downturn and a need to invest in our communities and reduce economic inequality. So our view is that even though there might be obstructionism coming from Republican leadership in the Senate, we think that there will be many opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to come together to pass strong legislation. And I also have to say that everything doesn't start and stop with the US Congress, that in order to win on climate change, we will need to continue to see leadership everywhere across society, in our schools, in the private sector, in our cities, in our states, across the country. Right now, we have the reality that every single country in the world is committed to the Paris Climate Accords, except the United States. We also have the reality that we have thousands of universities and colleges and schools that are invested in 100% clean energy. We have a growing number of states that have voted to move to 100% clean energy. So our anticipation is that we will see most of society continuing to move towards strong climate action, probably moving at an increasing rate. And we think that even if the US Senate doesn't lead on strong climate policy, they can be dragged along, and we expect to see progress regardless of who's controlling the Senate next year.
Thanks, Mike. Let me try Jen Dooley. Jen Yan from Bloomberg.
Hopefully you can hear me now. Thanks.
Yep,
my question, in doing this. What kind of opportunities are there for bipartisan legislative successes? I'm hoping you can drill down into some of those real targeted opportunities if there is indeed a Republican-controlled Senate. And in terms of EPA and other agencies fulfilling this mandate to act on climate, is it more important to be bold regulatorily or to hew very closely to the Clean Air Act and other underlying statutes to ensure those actions endure? Can you do both?
Tom, why don't you take a crack at the bold part? Tom Steyer, Jan? Varshini, you want to take that?
Can you repeat the last part of that question? I missed the end of it.
I don't know if you can hear me now. Yeah, you can. Okay, so
Yeah, okay.
I was just wondering, yeah, there's tension, I think, between being bold in terms of EPA regulation and potentially really sticking close to the bounds of statute. So you can be bold maybe and potentially run afoul of, be vulnerable in courts later. Maybe that's not true. I'd be curious for your thoughts on that. How important is it to be bold versus making sure these regulations endure after a Biden administration is gone?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have like particular expertise in exactly what you're talking about. To me, coming from the vantage point of the fact that, we saw full 4 million acres of land in California razed to the ground in a matter of days and weeks, and 5 storms batter the Gulf South. To me, there is no choice but to be as ambitious and bold as is possible and combine, as Joe Biden has actually been doing really well on the campaign trail, the climate crisis and ways of addressing the crisis alongside the jobs and economic agenda that he has been rallying voters around over the last few months very successfully. I think one of the first things, I'm hearing a lot of questions about the Senate and about what specific legislation could pass through the Senate. I think one opportunity that would be exciting but still pretty difficult if we have a Republican-controlled Senate is to attach it to some kind, is attaching climate change or Green New Deal-esque policies to must-pass stimulus legislation. And there is actually an opportunity potentially now with using a progressive bloc in a narrowed House to make it pass. That is one opportunity. I think another one that Biden could do right now that doesn't require Congress and could show that he's serious about using every tool in the executive toolbox would be to create a new position that reports directly to the president and that leads in all government effort at mobilizing to address the climate crisis in a similar way that we mobilized to address the threat of Nazi Germany in World War II. So something like this could coordinate, every federal agency to make sure that acting on climate was a full government project, making sure that climate was embedded into all of our spending, our regulations, our policies, our actions. He could stand it up with an all-star team and appoint someone who is both trusted by the climate and environmental justice communities. And, this is something that wouldn't require the approval of Congress. We actually saw him and Obama do this, but waited a number of years before getting to work around it. And I think it could be one of the most important things that he could do to ensure that there's more aggressive climate action from the federal government, regardless of what the Senate map looks like.
Thanks, Mark. And I think I want to keep moving on to questions, but remember, this is the dynamic. Even if McConnell's still running the Senate, it will be by an incredibly narrow margin. And as Mike pointed out, the dynamic where you have a pro-climate Speaker of the House, she's still the Speaker. She lost a few net seats, but she's still the Speaker and has a great climate agenda and has a great climate tracker. She's going to be pushing stuff through. And in this case, you have a president who also wants to get action. So the pressure to bear on a Republican Senate, there are still some Republicans who actually get this and care about it in that Senate. There would be it's a lot different than having a White House that was in denial. So it's a radically different opportunity to get stuff done, even if McConnell's running the Senate. Let me go to Amy Harder. Amy, you still there? By the way, Tom Steyer had to get off. Apologize for that. So I called on him and then he had to jump. So Amy, you still there?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Got it now. Yep.
Great. Well, hello. Thank you so much for holding this call. I have two related questions. Exit polls that I've looked at, most of them show that climate change was not a top concern. So if someone could respond to that. And then secondly, a blue wave that many people were expecting, which of course includes big climate policy, did not happen, which could indicate to some at least that the public is actually not on board with as big of a climate policy as what everyone on this call supports, and that there's actually, that the electorate is more moderate and is more concerned about, it supports fracking, for example, more in Pennsylvania than many in the climate community do. So can you guys address that sort of overall sentiment about how, while climate change was a big factor in this election in a way it has never been, that it actually cut a little bit negatively in these results? Thank you.
I'm going to let Joe answer as well, but the notion that this cut negatively doesn't square with the facts. The president, the person who's going to be president had the boldest climate policy ever. He was attacked for that, and voters supported his platform. And an exit poll does not tell you where the Biden voters are. An exit poll looks at the entire population. The voters who supported Joe Biden polled just the last couple of days ago. 3 and 4 said addressing climate change is really important. And 2 out of 3 said we support the $2 trillion Build Back Better plan. So the voters who elected Biden are for climate. They voted him because of that. You heard from Varsh earlier about young people care deeply about this. That was key to his victory. So the Trump voters, as part of the exit poll, don't understand and don't care about climate. But that's not where the people who elected the new president were. Joe, you've done a lot of research on, so why don't you take us a little bit on the polling as well?
Yeah, and I'm going to start by saying I hate exit polls, and now I'm going to quote one that we saw a nationwide sample where 66% of the electorate that turned out had climate change as a driving concern. So again, put that aside. I'm going to just expand a little bit on what Gene said. In a turnout election, you saw the real power of a hopeful vision for climate driving the vote. We saw that week 1, week 0, where the Biden campaign was releasing new digital ads targeting key voting demographics that he had to turn out on climate. So, if you look at the whole run of this campaign, it started by a Democratic primary shaking out primarily, pun there, with the candidates working on ambitious climate policy plans and fighting over that. Really to the very end, where you saw the smart political people saying, you know what, we need to talk about climate right now because people need that hopeful vision.
Gene, can I just add a little something? Is it okay?
Hey, Gene, let me get Wendy in first, because Wendy, I want to get.
Okay, sorry.
A lot on climate in a really important race. Wendy, you want to jump in here?
Sure. There's so many things to say, but I guess I'll hone in on the initial question that you asked, Amy. I think there's a few things. One is the public, broadly speaking, I mean, liberals, conservatives, everybody wants a clean environment. And I think we have to remember that is always the case. What we need to do, and I think it's our job as the environmental community, is to continue to deepen that support around things that people who don't agree with us necessarily, who didn't vote for Joe Biden, will get and understand. Our experience in the States, for instance, is that 100% clean energy is something that, not every Republican supports, but we've had broad-based support in the states where that has passed. That's the only reason it's passed. So I think we have the challenge for us as environmental leaders is twofold. One is this group and our staff and allies coming up with the policies that we can gain bipartisan legislative support on. And secondarily, it's making sure that we're continuing to speak to the grassroots, to the American public, and figure out what issues are they willing to support, because they are with us. They do want a clean environment. They want their kids not to have asthma. They don't want pollution in their communities. But what we have to do is connect them to solutions that they understand and that they can get behind. And it's a real challenge for us. So that I think is the challenge ahead of us.
Hey, Laura, as someone who works on the ground in a critically important state, you want to speak to how climate and clean energy plays in a place like Arizona, which people might not have understood, appreciated?
Sure. I mean, I think it takes a lot of education to make folks kind of connect to the issues. I'm also noting kind of the question around how do we cut through the noise around energy and environment at the state and local level. And it's really hard because it takes a lot of education, particularly for us. We're focused on engaging within the Latino community. And so we as environmental organizations haven't had enough conversations with a broad cross section of our communities to be able to draw the connections between public health and the air we breathe and the water we drink, between rising temperatures, between the bills that we pay. I mean, the health of our families and our pocketbooks are the closest things to us. And so being able to try and illustrate those connections and also just kind of create a more welcoming environment, I think is really helpful and intuitive, because oftentimes when you're thinking about traditional renewable energy initiatives or efforts at the state level, you're delving into renewable energy standards and vernacular that doesn't speak to people where they are. So it really is important and incumbent, I think, on our movement to be able to build out that engagement over the long term and think of it in a long range view.
Thanks, Laura. And let me throw this next question to Gina. So Theodoric Meyer, if you're still on, ask your question. Gina, take this one. Are you still there? There you go.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks for holding this call and for taking my question. Who would you like to see Biden appoint as to crucial positions like EPA administrator, energy secretary, climate czar, if he does in fact win? And who do you think is confirmable if Republicans do narrowly hold the Senate?
Sure, I'd love to take that question. I think I've phrased it this way: is he needs to appoint the Anthony Fauci of the Department of Energy and EPA. We just need somebody who follows the science, who understands the law. We need somebody that people can trust as experts in the field, not listen to political pundits. And I think we need people who recognize, someone in these positions who recognizes that they're working for the people. And simply in the range of EPA, they're not representing polluters' interests. They're representing the mission of that agency. And if they do that, and I'm not suggesting they have to be qualified as a scientist, I am suggesting that they have to be trusted, thoughtful human beings who recognize that the challenge of climate change is not just about our health, but it is about the economics, and it is about job growth, and it is about racial disparities, and they can find a path forward to do more than one thing at a time for the benefit of the people of our country.
Are there any names in particular that you would support or champion?
I am not naming names. I am naming the qualities of individuals, and many people can fit that bill. And I'm quite confident that one of the great things about Joe Biden is he reads people really well, and he's looking for somebody who is as thoughtful as he is. And I'm fully behind the choices that are going to be made.
Thanks, Gina. Anyone else want to chime in? One more person want to chime in on that particular question about appointments? Let's move on. There are several questions about Florida. Let me ask Bruce Ritchie, are you still on? A number of people had questions about Florida, but Bruce, you want to frame yours?
Yes, Democrats lost seats in Florida and Trump won by a comfortable margin. It's no longer a swing state. What do you think that portends for the environment and climate change in Florida? What do you all need to do to address that?
So Joe, Joe, I know you did a lot of work in Florida. Clearly a disappointment, no doubt about it. And maybe Mike, if you want to jump in after that, or anyone else.
Absolutely. And I have a long memory. I remember in 2018 when that very same state had a razor thin margin of voters choosing a governor and a Senate state. So I'm not sure Florida is not about is a swing state or battleground, however you want to couch it. Florida is important, and green groups including mine, are going to be figuring out exactly what happened in Florida. Let me just talk a little bit about this, because I actually saw a question in the chat that was very similar. I'm trying to answer both. Throughout the campaign cycle, we saw voters engage in and around climate issues in Florida more than any other state that we were doing this research. Throughout the election, there were key places in Florida where climate was a top 2, top 3 issue for folks, because they were feeling the impacts of climate right there, and they recognized that it was climate change, whether it was sea level rise or red tide. These were very local issues for them. Now, set that aside just for 1 second. When voters went to the polls across the state, you have to then take Florida as the funhouse mirrors of politics as it is. There are going to be a number of things factoring in of how people were going to pull the lever, and that played out in a variety of different ways across the state. It's really, really hard for me sitting here right now with the data that I have to unpack that any further, but we will. And again, we'll continue to make those investments, because you are seeing voters engage on these issues and highlight them in town halls, in correspondence with politicians. We'll continue to work there.
Thanks, Joe. I can offer a couple quick answers in addition to Joe's. I guess what I would say from a big picture analysis is that nothing in politics is permanent, right? And we shouldn't take any state for granted. Regardless of what color the state might be after this year's election. It wasn't so long ago that California had a Republican governor. So we shouldn't assume that what happened in 2020, even in addition to what happened in 2016, means that something is locked into the future, regardless of what party might be in power in that state. What is also true is that climate change will continue to get worse. The impacts of climate change will become even more severe, even more clear, even more damaging. What is also true is that the costs of clean energy will continue to drop, and the benefits of clean energy will continue to become more apparent when it comes to our health, when it comes to our economy, and when it comes to our communities. So what that means from an environmental perspective is that every state is in play. Every district is in play. Every voting block and constituency is in play, because every one of us counts, and because every one of us is affected by the economic crisis, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis. So it's our job as environmentalists, regardless of where we sit on the spectrum, to talk to all voters and to continue to persuade them and engage them in the solutions that we're offering, because our solutions will benefit all Americans, not Americans of a particular party. And the results of that when it comes to political elections are up for grabs. We don't think that Florida is a lock, just like we don't think that California will always be a lock.
Thanks, Mike. And I think a couple people, Tom had to leave, a couple have to go. Varsh, I know you have to leave in a second. One of the other questions was, what's the data suggest that young people care about climate? Do you want to just weigh in on that? I know you have to jump off after. And I think a few of us are willing to stay on because there are more questions for another 10 minutes or so. So Varsh, you want to take shed a little more light on the data in terms of young voters and how they care about climate?
Sure. I mean, across the board, young people in super majorities across both political parties believe the government should be taking action to stop the climate crisis. And in fact, when we looked at polls from earlier this year, it showed that amongst voters that voted for Donald Trump in 2016, the group that was the most likely to swing towards voting for Joe Biden in 2020 were young people particularly in swing states like Florida. Our polling on the Green New Deal, even after taking so many attacks over the last few years, has shown that young people still support policies and policy agendas like the Green New Deal in super majorities over 70%. We saw that just in the exit polls, literally on Fox News the other day, that American support overall believe that the government should be doing something to stop the climate crisis greater than 70%. And so I think there's a sense that I believe that the elected population, that politicians show far more polarization than there actually is amongst the American people. And I think what Mike just said is completely right. We cannot count out any single state. We have to understand that for us to win on this issue, yes, we have to win elections, but what allows for public opinion to shift dramatically, I mean, just amongst Democrats and independents in 2016, people who believed that climate change was a top priority in this nation was just at 46%. This year, it is at 80%, and that is because of movements. So don't count out movements. We have got to keep organizing all across this country. We cannot leave out any states. We've got to have a 50-state strategy for that. And mobilizing young people and people all across this nation who believe that the climate crisis is an existential threat. And that combined with really smart, really savvy, organized electoral organizing is what's going to get it done over the next decade.
Great. And I think we're all going to have to run a couple minutes. I got a couple more. I'm going to try to sneak in. Jenny Doring. I'm going to ask Gina to answer this one, and someone else can chime in afterwards. Jenny, you still there? Jenny, we can't. If you're on mute.
Hi. Okay. Great. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So thanks. So I was wondering, where do the Clean Power Plan and the Affordable Clean Energy Rule that replaced it stand in all of this? What's the timeline for a Biden EPA to reinstall something like CPP or beyond? And how would that happen?
Right now, the Clean Power Plan has been rolled back, and there is an ACE rule. I think there are, as you probably know, NRDC does a lot of litigation on these things, and we're very happy to be litigating the new ACE rule because we've won over 90% of our cases so far, and we've sued over 100 times because the administration doesn't follow the science, and they don't follow evidence, and they don't make a good case in their version of the Clean Power Plan. Now, a new administration can begin rethinking that as soon, probably even before they get started, if they decide to go by route of a standard, and they may very well do that. I am in favor of standards and investments and tools that focus on equity as the best path forward. So I'm sure they'll be looking at this issue, and they can, at any point in time, make a change both in their support for the ACE rule and whether or not they're defending it in court versus rethink the way in which regulations could create constraints in the energy sector in a way that will allow them to more quickly achieve Joe Biden's goal of having clean power by 2035.
Thanks, Gina. And we're going to ask one last question. And again, I think there are other questions we didn't get to. The staff are happy to follow up with a lot of them because there are many more than we were able to get to. Let me get to Stephanie Abbs to the last question because it summarized a lot of things we've been talking about, but it can sharpen a little bit. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks, Gene, and thanks everyone for having the call today. I wanted to just touch on, in the big picture, what is your kind of ranked to-do list of what you want to see a Biden administration push for first, and how do you proceed if what is being proposed either from the agencies or what is moving through Congress is not as ambitious as you would like it to be?
Well, why don't we start in the first part? Who else? Mike, you want to start first? And Wendy, and who else is still on? I know we're losing folks. So who else is still on? Mike and Wendy, you want to just chime in on that, and I can wrap it.
Okay, great question, Stephanie. Let me answer it this way. This is not an exact ranked order. So this is a bundle of things that we would put towards the top, and we'll see how things go in the next few days and weeks. And we will probably come up with a more specific ranking. But at the top of the list, certainly we want to see for every legislative vehicle that moves in 2021, we want to see strong clean energy and climate elements to that. We think that that's possible, achievable, and will have a big impact, whether that, again, is COVID relief or economic stimulus or an infrastructure package. We think that there are big opportunities on those packages as well as other things that will move. Secondly, we want to restore science, as Gina has said so eloquently, we want to restore science to the EPA and other federal agencies. We will need to see strong rules to protect our air and water and climate, particularly rules on cars and trucks. We think that that's within reach. Third, we think that there is, we would expect the Biden administration to move forward with an end to leases for fossil fuel, end to fossil fuel leases on public lands for both lands and water. And finally, we expect to see a reassertion of US leadership on a global scale, on climate change, on biodiversity, and on other issues.
Now, whoever else is, I think looks like Joe and Wendy are still on. You want to do quick answers as well?
Yeah, let me just, I mean, those are all good ideas. Other good things that in the toxics area that we didn't talk about are PFAS. Somebody I know in the chat had asked about that, and we would love for the administration to do more on that by executive order, as well as other kinds of toxic contamination protection, including replacing lead pipes across our systems, which we think would be a good bipartisan effort.
Joe? Joe, yeah, mute.
Nope, it's covered.
Good. And again, remember, personnel is policy. So obviously the choices they make in terms of personnel in these next couple of months are also critically important. And obviously getting back to a role in the international community, which, you know, sadly, as folks know, yesterday was the day that we officially pulled out of Paris, being back in that community as well, showing the leadership we need at home. So we're not just talking, we're actually being serious about getting the work done. Are two other things, personnel and re-engaging in the international are critical as well. Thanks so many of you for joining us. Sorry I didn't get to every question, but we covered a lot. People, you know, feel free to follow back with people individually, but appreciate all this. It's a really important historic moment. Climate change, we need to make that progress at the federal level like we haven't in a long time, frankly, but also in state after state after state. Thanks for joining us, folks. Appreciate it.